December 3, 1943. Approximately 11,000 meters above Solingen, Germany. Lieutenant Hans Philipp, the Luftwaffe's fourth highest scoring ace with 206 confirmed victories, banked his Focke-Wulf 190 into position behind a formation of American heavy bombers. Through his gun sight, he studied the approaching aircraft with professional contempt. B-24 Liberators, the ugly American bomber that his intelligence briefings had dismissed as obsolete before it even entered service. Maximum speed of just 480 kilometers per hour, slower than the B-17 Flying Fortress. A high-wing design that restricted the pilot's visibility. Defensive armament concentrated in powered turrets that German fighters had learned to exploit. These aircraft represented everything wrong with American aircraft design, prioritizing production simplicity over combat effectiveness. Philipp positioned his fighter for the standard attack run, approaching from the high rear quarter where the B-24's defensive coverage was weakest. His aircraft carried 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns, more than enough firepower to destroy the lumbering bomber ahead. He had executed this attack profile successfully 206 times. This would be number 207. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Philipp could not see from his tactical position 11,000 meters above industrial Germany was the mathematical reality that would doom not just this single sortie, but the entire Third Reich's air defense. Behind the formation he was attacking stretched 348 more B-24 Liberators, part of a raid involving over 500 heavy bombers striking targets across western Germany. Within 6 months, such raids would involve over 1,000 American bombers simultaneously. Within 12 months, the 8th Air Force alone would deploy more heavy bombers in a single day than Germany possessed in its entire inventory. The slow, supposedly vulnerable B-24 that Philipp prepared to attack represented the leading edge of an industrial avalanche that German intelligence had accurately reported, but German leadership had refused to believe. By war's end, American factories would produce 18,188 B-24 Liberators. They would drop 635,000 tons of bombs on Nazi-occupied Europe. No other aircraft in history would be produced in such quantities or deliver such destructive tonnage. The technical inferiority that Philipp observed through his gun sight meant absolutely nothing against production superiority measured in tens of thousands. The systematic German dismissal of the B-24 began before the aircraft even entered combat service. In April 1942, Luftwaffe intelligence obtained detailed specifications of the consolidated B-24 through neutral Swedish sources. The technical analysis, prepared by the Reich Air Ministry's Aircraft Evaluation Section, represented thorough professional assessment marred by fatal assumptions. The report noted the B-24's maximum speed of 480 km per hour, significantly slower than the B-17's 462 km per hour at altitude. While this seems contradictory, German analysts correctly identified that the B-24's high-wing Davis airfoil design, while efficient for range, created parasitic drag that reduced top speed compared to the B-17's conventional wing design. The report emphasized this as a critical vulnerability. Range was acknowledged at 3,200 kilometers with maximum bomb load, but German analysts dismissed this as irrelevant. From English bases, the B-24 could reach any target in Germany, making extended range militarily meaningless for the European theatre. What intelligence failed to consider was that this range made the B-24 ideal for simultaneous production, meaning the same aircraft design could serve both European and Pacific theatres without modification. The defensive armament analysis revealed what German tacticians believed was the B-24's fatal weakness. 10 50 caliber Browning machine guns distributed across nose, tail, top, belly, and waist positions. The report correctly noted that the early B-24 models lacked the B-17's chin turret, leaving the frontal approach relatively undefended. German fighter tactics immediately focused on head-on attacks exploiting this vulnerability. Maximum bomb load of 8,000 pounds seemed adequate but unremarkable. The B-17 carried similar tonnage. What escaped German analysis was that bomb load combined with production numbers mattered more than individual aircraft capacity. One bomber carrying 8,000 pounds meant nothing. 10,000 bombers carrying 8,000 pounds each meant apocalypse. General Major Adolf Galland, commanding general of Luftwaffe fighter forces, reviewed the B-24 assessment in June 1942. His margin notes, preserved in captured German documents, reveal the fundamental miscalculation. Slower than B-17, more vulnerable to frontal attack, high wing restricts pilot combat visibility. This aircraft represents American desperation, attempting to supplement insufficient B-17 production with inferior design. Our standard tactics will prove effective. What Galland failed to understand was that the B-24 wasn't designed for individual combat superiority. It was designed for mass production. The high-wing design that restricted visibility simplified manufacturing. The tricycle landing gear that German pilots mocked as ungainly made the aircraft easier for inexperienced American pilots to land safely. Every design decision prioritized production volume over combat performance, a philosophy alien to German engineering culture that prized individual technical excellence. The first B-24 combat mission over Europe occurred on October 7, 1942. 90 bombers from the 8th Air Force struck the Lille steelworks in occupied France. Luftwaffe fighters intercepted, and the results seemed to confirm German assumptions. Fighters attacking from the frontal quarter found the B-24's defensive fire less intense than the B-17's. 4 bombers were shot down, validating German tactical doctrine. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77, filed an after-action report that captured German confidence. The new American bomber proves easier to destroy than the B-17 when properly engaged. Its slower speed allows extended firing opportunities. Recommend continued emphasis on frontal attacks. German fighter pilots began calling the B-24 the flying coffin, though this nickname would later haunt them as the aircraft they dismissed filled European skies in numbers they couldn't imagine. The mathematical reality German intelligence understood but German leadership refused to accept began accumulating at the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant in Michigan. Construction had begun in April 1941 on farmland 18 miles west of Detroit. By March 1942, the building's basic structure was complete. 3.5 million square feet under one roof, an assembly line stretching 1 mile, the largest factory ever constructed. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, had promised the impossible, building B-24 bombers using automotive mass production techniques. The aviation industry had laughed. Consolidated Aircraft, which designed the B-24, required 120,000 man-hours to build each bomber in their San Diego facility. Sorensen promised to reduce that to 18,000 man-hours through assembly line production. Initial results were catastrophic. The first B-24 rolled out of Willow Run in September 1942 required complete rebuilding. Quality control failures approached 50%. Aviation experts proclaimed Sorensen's vision impossible, validating those who argued that aircraft required craftsmen, not assembly line workers. But Ford engineers persevered, breaking the B-24's 488,193 parts into manageable sub-assemblies. By January 1943, the month Hans Philipp was defending German skies, Willow Run had achieved steady production of 150 bombers monthly. By March, when German intelligence presented Admiral Wilhelm Canaris with reports claiming hourly production rates, the number had reached 342 monthly. The Germans didn't believe it. Goering dismissed the intelligence as American propaganda. Hitler declared the reports physically impossible. But the numbers were accurate and accelerating. By December 1943, the same month Philipp prepared to attack that formation over Solingen, Willow Run was producing 365 B-24s monthly, one every 20 hours. Other American factories, Douglas in Tulsa, North American in Dallas, consolidated in Fort Worth and San Diego, were producing hundreds more monthly. The total B-24 production for 1943 reached 3,341 aircraft. German intelligence knew these numbers. Swedish diplomats toured American factories and reported back. Spanish military attachés obtained production figures. Mexican agents intercepted railroad manifests showing aluminum shipments. Every source confirmed the same impossible truth. American was producing heavy bombers, at rates exceeding German production of all aircraft types combined. But presenting these numbers to Nazi leadership meant risking execution for defeatism. Admiral Canaris tried and was eventually hanged. Others learned silence. The first massive B-24 raid that forced German pilots to confront mathematical reality occurred on July 28, 1943. Operation Tidal Wave sent 178 B-24s from bases in Libya to attack the Ploiești oil refineries in Romania, Germany's primary fuel source. The raid became infamous for 41% losses, 54 bombers destroyed. German propaganda celebrated this as proof of B-24 vulnerability, but within American production terms, those 54 destroyed bombers represented less than 2 weeks of B-24 production. Willow Run alone could replace every lost aircraft in 11 days. Consolidated's Fort Worth plant could replace them in 13 days. The concept of acceptable losses transformed when production measured in thousands monthly rather than hundreds yearly. What seemed catastrophic to German strategists meant nothing to American logistics. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 kills, encountered his first truly massive B-24 formation on January 11, 1944, during a raid on Brunswick. His post-mission report, discovered in Luftwaffe archives, reveals the psychological impact of confronting industrial warfare's reality. I counted aircraft until the numbers became meaningless. Conservative estimate: 400 heavy bombers in the main formation, perhaps 200 were B-24s. Our group had 19 serviceable fighters. We attacked from the frontal quarter as trained. I destroyed one B-24, confirmed. My wingman destroyed another. But for every bomber falling, 3 more appeared. The stream was endless. What disturbed Baer most was American tactical adaptation. Early B-24 formations had been vulnerable to frontal attacks. By January 1944, B-24s flew in tight box formations, where each aircraft's defensive guns overlapped, creating interlocking fields of fire. German fighters attacking frontally faced combined fire from dozens of 50-caliber Browning machine guns. The slow-speed German intelligence had mocked as weakness became tactical advantage, allowing precise formation keeping under combat conditions. The bombing tonnage accumulation revealed another dimension of numerical superiority. A single B-24 carried 8,000 pounds of bombs. This seemed modest compared to later British heavy bombers like the Lancaster carrying 14,000 pounds. But multiply 8,000 pounds by 18,000 aircraft, and the mathematics became apocalyptic. 144 million pounds, or 72,000 tons, per deployment, if every B-24 flew simultaneously. Of course, not every B-24 flew simultaneously. Maintenance, training, Pacific deployment, and operational losses meant peak strength reached approximately 4,000 B-24s in European theatre at any given time. But even this reduced number represented 32 million pounds of bombs available for deployment, more than the entire Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the Blitz. The actual tonnage dropped exceeded 635,000 tons. This represented multiple deployments, each B-24 flying dozens of missions before loss or retirement. Some individual aircraft completed over 100 missions. The B-24 Witchcraft completed 130 missions without aborting a single one, dropping over 1 million pounds of bombs across Germany and occupied Europe. By March 1944, a typical large raid involved 800 to 1,000 heavy bombers. B-24s comprised approximately 40% of these formations. On March 6, during the first American raid on Berlin, 262 B-24s participated alongside 492 B-17s. German fighter response involved fewer than 100 serviceable aircraft. The mathematics of air combat had become simple arithmetic. German fighters were outnumbered 10 to 1 by bombers alone, before counting American fighter escorts. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Lieutenant Hans Philipp never filed a report on his attack against the B-24 formation over Solingen on December 3, 1943. During his attack run, American P-47 Thunderbolt fighters bounced his flight. Philipp's Focke-Wulf 190 was shot down. He bailed out, but his parachute failed to deploy properly. Germany's fourth-ranking ace, the pilot who had dismissed B-24s as easy targets, died at age 23, having never understood that individual aircraft quality meant nothing against industrial quantity. The systematic collection of bombing tonnage data reveals the B-24's devastating effectiveness, despite its technical inferiority. Between 1942 and 1945, B-24s flew over 313,000 sorties in Europe, using conservative estimates of £8,000 per sortie. This equals approximately 2.5 million tons of bombs. The actual verified figure of 635,000 tons represents more selective targeting, partial loads, and aborted missions, but still exceeded total German bombing of Britain by factor of 3 to 1. The specific targeting data preserved in United States Strategic Bombing Survey archives demonstrates how B-24 tonnage systematically dismantled German war production. Synthetic oil facilities received 135,000 tons from B-24s alone. Transportation infrastructure absorbed 168,000 tons. Aircraft factories, the very facilities that produced fighters to defend against the bombers, received 92,000 tons. The irony was mathematically precise. German aircraft factories were destroyed by aircraft they had dismissed as inferior before they entered service. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland's transformation from confident dismissal to desperate recognition occurred during Big Week, February 20th through 25th, 1944. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, targeting German aircraft production facilities with overwhelming force. Over 6 days, 3,500 heavy bomber sorties struck 12 major aircraft factories. B-24s comprised approximately 1,100 of these sorties. Galland's February 24th diary entry, discovered in captured Luftwaffe archives, reveals his psychological collapse when confronting production mathematics. Today's raid involved estimated 600 heavy bombers, perhaps 240 B-24s. We destroyed 38 confirmed, perhaps 50 total. But intelligence reports America produced over 1,000 heavy bombers in January alone. We cannot destroy them faster than they build them. The equation is impossible. For every bomber we shoot down, 3 more appear. We are fighting mathematics, and mathematics cannot be defeated by courage. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots intensified as B-24 numbers increased. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock, who survived the war with 33 kills, described a March 19, 1944 mission in his memoir. The formations appeared endless. B-24s flying in perfect boxes, each box containing dozens of aircraft. I counted over 400 heavy bombers, knowing that behind them would come 400 more tomorrow, and 400 the day after. We had perhaps 40 fighters serviceable. The mathematics were insane. What particularly demoralized German pilots was American replacement capacity. A Luftwaffe fighter pilot shot down over Germany, if he survived, could return to combat within days. The aircraft lost, however, took months to replace given German production capacity. An American B-24 shot down over Germany meant permanent crew loss, but aircraft replacement within 2 weeks. The Americans were trading irreplaceable pilots for replaceable machines. Germans were trading irreplaceable machines for replaceable machines. By April 1944, Willow Run achieved its peak production rate, 428 B-24s, in 30 days. This single factory was producing more heavy bombers monthly than Germany's entire aircraft industry managed of all types. The mathematical disparity had become so grotesque that German intelligence officers stopped reporting it, knowing such numbers would be dismissed as enemy propaganda or defeatist exaggeration. The strategic bombing campaign's intensification through 1944 demonstrated B-24 ubiquity. The 15th Air Force, operating from Italian bases, flew B-24s almost exclusively. The 8th Air Force in England maintained roughly equal numbers of B-17 and B-24 groups. On any given day, Between 600 and 800 B-24s were available for operations in European theatre. June 6, 1944, D-Day, showcased absolute American aerial superiority. Over 11,000 Allied aircraft supported the invasion, including approximately 1,000 B-24s assigned to bomb coastal defenses. The Luftwaffe managed 319 sorties across the entire day, less than 3% of Allied presence. General Feldmarschall Hugo Spurler, commanding Luftflotte, 3 responsible for Western France, sent a message to Berlin that morning. Enemy air superiority is absolute. We are helpless. Our intelligence was correct. We were buried under their production. The oil campaign beginning May 1944 demonstrated B-24 strategic effectiveness despite technical limitations. The 15th Air Force specialized in attacking Romanian and Austrian oil facilities, missions requiring extreme range, where the B-24's 3,200-kilometer radius proved decisive. The B-17's shorter range made it unsuitable for targets like Ploiești, giving the supposedly inferior B-24 exclusive responsibility for crippling German fuel supplies. Between May and August 1944, B-24s from the 15th Air Force dropped 46,000 tons of bombs on Axis oil facilities. German synthetic fuel production collapsed from 316,000 tons in March 1944 to 17,000 tons by September. Luftwaffe training flights were curtailed to save fuel. Combat operations declined. By December, German fighters often sortied with partial fuel loads, knowing they couldn't return to base if combat lasted too long. Major Heinz Baer described the fuel crisis's impact in a January 1945 interrogation after his capture. We had aircraft sitting on runways that couldn't fly for lack of fuel. We had pilots who completed training but never flew combat because we couldn't waste fuel on inexperienced pilots who would likely be shot down their first mission. Meanwhile, American bombers appeared daily, burning thousands of gallons, their fuel supplies unlimited. The B-24s that couldn't fight worth a damn individually had starved us collectively. The industrial targeting data reveals systematic destruction. The Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg received repeated B-24 attacks, totaling 23,000 tons. Peak production of 360 fighters monthly in June 1943 declined to 74 monthly by December 1944. The Focke-Wulf plant at Marienburg absorbed 14,000 tons from B-24s, reducing production from 135 aircraft monthly to 38. German attempts to disperse production into small, hidden facilities made individual factories harder to locate, but reduced overall efficiency catastrophically. Moving machinery consumed months. Worker transportation to dispersed sites wasted hours daily. Quality control across scattered locations proved impossible. The entire Jaeger dispersal program, initiated February 1944 after devastating B-24 raids on centralized factories, reduced German aircraft production by approximately 30%, while simultaneously making factories more vulnerable to intelligence-driven bombing. The mathematical verdict became inescapable by autumn 1944. Germany was producing approximately 3,000 aircraft monthly, all types. America was producing 7,000 aircraft monthly for European theatre alone, while simultaneously supplying Pacific operations. The production ratio exceeded 4-1. Loss rates favored Americans even more dramatically. American factories replaced lost bombers within 2 weeks. German factories required 3 months, if materials were available at all. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring's final staff meeting regarding air defense occurred January 15, 1945, in his private train, sheltered in a tunnel to avoid air attack. Oberst Günther Lützow, one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders, with 108 kills, presented casualty and production figures. Göring's response, recorded by his adjutant, revealed complete psychological breakdown. "Show me the B-24 production numbers again." Lützow presented the intelligence. 18,000, produced by December 1944. Peak monthly production 650 aircraft. Current European theatre strength approximately 4,000 aircraft. Göring stared at the figures in silence for several minutes before speaking. "That ridiculous, ugly, slow American bomber that we dismissed. 18,000 of them. We produced 94,000 aircraft total, all types, the entire war. They produced 18,000 of one bomber type we considered inferior. How do we fight this? Lutzow responded honestly. We don't, Herr Reichsmarschall. We already lost. The final major B-24 operations occurred in March and April 1945 as Allied armies penetrated Germany itself. Raids shifted from strategic targets to tactical support of ground forces. On March 2nd, 1,500 heavy bombers, approximately 600 B-24s, struck transportation networks around Cologne. German fighter response: 0 aircraft. The Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as effective opposition. April 16, 1945 saw one of the war's final massive raids. Over 1,000 heavy bombers, including 400 B-24s, struck railroad yards and communication centers. Flak remained intense, but fighters rarely appeared. Experienced German pilots were dead, fuel was unavailable, replacement aircraft didn't exist. The B-24s that German intelligence had dismissed in 1942 now operated over Germany without opposition. The final B-24 combat mission in Europe occurred May 2, 1945 against the Skoda Armaments Works in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. The war in Europe ended 6 days later. The total accounting revealed numbers that defied German pre-war assumptions about acceptable losses and replacement rates. Total B-24s produced 18,188. Total B-24s lost in combat, all theatres, 3,741. Replacement ratio: approximately 5 aircraft produced for every one lost. Germany had struggled to maintain 1-to-1 replacement. The Americans were producing aircraft 4 times faster than losing them, while simultaneously expanding total force size. European theatre B-24s flew 313,000 sorties, dropping 635,000 tons. Average bomb load per sortie worked out to approximately 4,000 pounds, indicating many missions flew with partial loads against tactical targets, requiring precision rather than maximum tonnage. But even at reduced loads, the cumulative tonnage exceeded total German bombing of Britain, Soviet Union, and all other targets combined during the entire war. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after war's end, provided comprehensive analysis of B-24 effectiveness. Survey teams interviewed German military and industrial leaders, examined factory records, and assessed damage. The findings vindicated American production strategy over German technical excellence. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, testified extensively about bombing's impact. When interrogators asked specifically about B-24 operations, Speer's response was statistically precise. The B-24, which your intelligence told us was inferior to the B-17, proved equally destructive and more numerous. German records show B-24 attacks reduced our ball-bearing production by 47%, aircraft production by 33%, and oil production by 61%. Technical inferiority meant nothing against such numbers. Speer elaborated on production philosophy differences. German engineering culture prized individual aircraft superiority. Every modification improving performance by 2% was implemented regardless of production delay. American culture prized quantity and reliability. They accepted aircraft performing at 95% theoretical maximum if it meant producing twice as many. In total war, quantity defeated quality. Their inferior B-24 defeated our superior fighters through overwhelming numbers. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland's post-war interrogation provided pilot perspective. American interrogators asked why the Luftwaffe failed to stop B-24 raids despite the aircraft's known vulnerabilities. Galland's response captured the mathematical helplessness German fighters faced. Early war, we intercepted bomber formations with equal or superior numbers. We could exploit B-24 weaknesses. By mid-1944, we faced bomber streams of 800 to 1,000 aircraft with perhaps 60 fighters. Tactical advantage meant nothing. If every German fighter destroyed one bomber and survived, which was impossible, we still faced 700 more bombers. They simply had too many. Major Heinz Beer, imprisoned at Nuremberg while awaiting war crimes investigation, wrote extensive memoir materials. His section on B-24 operations reveals professional respect grudgingly earned. I remember mocking the B-24's slowness in 1942. By 1944, that slowness meant perfect formation keeping under heavy combat. I remember exploiting frontal vulnerability in 1943. By 1944, they flew in boxes where frontal attack meant facing fire from 20 aircraft simultaneously. Every weakness we identified, they corrected through tactics and numbers. They didn't need the perfect aircraft. They had enough adequate aircraft to overwhelm any defense. The psychological impact of facing unlimited American production persisted in German aviator testimony for decades. At the 1965 Luftwaffe reunion in Munich, former pilots discussed their wartime experiences. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, Germany's most decorated pilot, described the moment he understood Germany had lost. January 1945, flying ground support on Eastern Front. I looked west and saw the contrails of hundreds of American heavy bombers attacking Berlin. I looked east and saw Soviet fighters swarming over our positions. I realized Germany was being crushed between infinite Russian manpower and infinite American production. The B-24 formations heading to Berlin represented American industrial capacity. Each aircraft required millions of man-hours to produce. They had millions available. We had thousands. The economic analysis reveals production disparities' staggering scope. Total B-24 program cost, approximately $2.8 billion in 1940s currency, equivalent to $48 billion today. This represented 1.2% of total American war expenditure. Germany spent 40% of industrial capacity on aircraft production, yet produced fewer total aircraft than America's B-24 program alone. Willow Run's economic impact demonstrated democracy's industrial advantage. The plant employed 42,000 workers at peak, 26% women. Average wage? Approximately $1.50 per hour, roughly $60 weekly. Workers purchased $35 million in war bonds, essentially lending their own wages to finance production. German aircraft workers, increasingly slave laborers by 1944, purchased no bonds and engaged in widespread sabotage. The technological legacy proved equally significant. B-24 production pioneered manufacturing techniques that transformed post-war industry. Statistical quality control, developed to reduce defects in aircraft production, became standard practice worldwide. Assembly line techniques refined at Willow Run influenced automobile production for decades. The engineers who managed B-24 production went on to design commercial aircraft, spacecraft, and industrial facilities. Rose Will Monroe, the Willow Run riveter who became Rosie the Riveter propaganda symbol, described her wartime experience in a 1984 interview. I was a Kentucky farm girl who'd never seen a factory before Pearl Harbor. Within 6 months, I was building the world's most complex machine. We had Negro women working beside white women. We had grandmothers working beside teenagers. We had disabled workers managing sophisticated equipment. Democracy meant using everyone's abilities. That's why we built 18,000 bombers, while Germany built excuses. The cultural impact resonated through American society for generations. Veterans returning from Europe carried stories of B-24 missions. Hollywood produced films celebrating bomber crews. The B-24, Diamond Lil, one of few survivors, became permanent museum display. Children who watched B-24s being built became engineers who designed commercial jetliners. The women who riveted B-24s raised daughters who entered professions previously closed to them. Conversely, German society struggled with the memory of aerial defeat. The psychologist Alexander Mitscherlich studied German post-war trauma and concluded that bombing represented not just physical destruction, but psychological annihilation. Citizens who had believed Nazi promises of superiority watched American bombers appear daily, unstoppable, unlimited. The B-24 formations represented visible proof of ideological failure. Superior race theory couldn't compete with democratic industrial mobilization. The strategic lessons influenced Cold War planning profoundly. American defense policy emphasized production capacity as much as technical superiority. The B-52 bomber, designed in the late 1940s, deliberately prioritized production simplicity and operational reliability over maximum performance, applying B-24 philosophy to jet-age warfare. Soviet planners, studying World War II, reached opposite conclusions, emphasizing technical excellence over production volume, repeating German mistakes. Hermann Göring's final testimony at Nuremberg specifically addressed the B-24. Prosecutors presented production figures and raid statistics. Göring's October 11, 1946 statement revealed complete acceptance of defeat's industrial basis. The B-24 Liberator was named correctly. It liberated Europe through American production capacity. We dismissed it as technically inferior. That dismissal was the beginning of our defeat. You cannot win wars with superior technology if your enemy has 10 times more adequate technology. I learned this too late. Germany learned this at cost of total destruction. The mathematical verdict admits no ambiguity. 18,188 B-24s produced, versus Germany's total heavy bomber production of approximately 3,000 aircraft. All types, entire war. 635,000 tons dropped by B-24s alone, versus 75,000 tons dropped by Luftwaffe on Britain during the Blitz. Production ratio, 6:1. Tonnage ratio, 8:1. Individual aircraft comparisons remained debatable. The B-17 carried similar bomb loads, with arguably better defensive armament. British Lancaster bombers carried heavier loads on night missions, but no aircraft approached B-24 production numbers or cumulative tonnage delivered. Quantity established its own quality through mathematical inevitability. The final irony emerged from German post-war industrial recovery. When West Germany rebuilt aircraft production in the 1950s, factories adopted American mass production techniques learned from studying captured B-24 manufacturing documentation. The Ford production methods that German intelligence had dismissed as unsuitable for aircraft became global standard practice. Willow Run's assembly line principles influenced every major aircraft manufacturer worldwide. General Carl Spaatz, commanding general of United States Strategic Air Forces Europe, provided the war's epitaph for B-24 operations in his final report dated August 1945. The B-24 Liberator proved the decisive weapon of the strategic bombing campaign not through individual superiority, but through overwhelming numbers. Where quality was debatable, quantity was absolute. The enemy could never replace what we could endlessly replenish. By war's end, approximately 6,000 B-24s remained in American inventory. Most were scrapped immediately. Their military utility ended. A few survived as transports, trainers, and test beds. The last B-24 retired from United States military service in 1954, 9 years after war's end. Of 18,000 produced, fewer than 20 complete examples survive today in museums worldwide. But the B-24's true legacy persists not in preserved aircraft but in validated principles. Democracy could outproduce dictatorship. Free workers exceeded slave labor productivity. Technical adequacy in overwhelming numbers defeated technical excellence in limited quantities. These lessons shaped Cold War strategy, influenced industrial policy, and vindicated American faith in production capacity over martial excellence. The story that began with German laughter at slow, supposedly vulnerable American bombers ended with German surrender beneath skies filled with those same aircraft. Hans Philipp's contempt, viewing a B-24 through his gun sight in December 1943, represented Nazi ideology's fatal flaw, confusing technical metrics with strategic reality, mistaking individual performance for collective capacity, believing racial mythology could overcome industrial mathematics. 18,188 B-24 Liberators, each carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs, each produced faster than Germany could destroy them, each representing democratic industrial mobilization that totalitarianism couldn't match. They weren't the fastest bombers. They weren't the most heavily armed. They weren't the most technically sophisticated. but they existed in such numbers that speed, armament, and sophistication became irrelevant against mathematical inevitability. German pilots who survived to tell their stories universally acknowledged this truth. Hans Joachim Marseille, Günther Rohl, Gerhard Barkhorn. Every ace who faced American bomber streams reached identical conclusions. Individual pilot skill, tactical excellence, and technical superiority meant nothing against enemy production measured in tens of thousands. The slow B-24 they had mocked buried the Third Reich under 635,000 tons of high explosive, demonstrating that war's ultimate mathematics reduced to simple equation. Enough adequate weapons defeat few superior weapons every single time. The Luftwaffe laughed at slow B-24 Liberators in 1942. By 1945, 18,000 of those aircraft had dropped more tonnage on Germany than the Luftwaffe delivered in the entire war, destroyed German industrial capacity, starved the Wehrmacht of fuel, and proven that democratic production defeated totalitarian precision. The laughter stopped. The bombs continued. Mathematics rendered its verdict. Democracy had buried dictatorship under an avalanche of adequacy produced in overwhelming quantity. The Reich that dismissed American production capacity died beneath it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.